Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I don't really have much else to say about myself. I love Dr. Williams, as I now know him fondly as Hakim, to get us started, wherever you'd like to start.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me and David, thank you especially for inviting me to have this chat with you. We hang often and we have lots of wonderful conversations, and it's nice for us to have an opportunity to kind of record one of those moments. So I wanted to start off, David, by reading a little piece of a poem. I normally read it in my Intro to Caribbean Studies class, which you had taken, but I'm not sure if I ever read that poem in that class. It's by a Jamaican poet called Olive Senior, and the poem is entitled Meditation on Yellow. And I'm just going to read three lines from it. I want to feel you cannot tear my song from my throat. You cannot erase the memory of my story. You cannot catch my rhythm. It's a much longer poem, and I'll share it with you after this is finished. And it is a kind of a rebuke of and a defiance in the face of colonialism and neocolonialism. And so I just love that defiant piece right there. And I'm like, yeah, so much was taken from our peoples, and yet we still tucked something away to pass on to future generations. And so, is there any part of that poem there that resonates with you and your work, David?
I love that passage. I love that. The thing that I connect with that, and I think it can segue beautifully into actually like what we see in the work in the exhibition. And starting with that piece is so nice because the color is at the forefront. The color is what's being used to convey, to dictate, to imply, to preserve, to venerate. The color is the focus. The color is everything, it's interesting the conversation about like maybe how I think about color in my work, because in a classical sense, color maybe has been considered like a secondary quality, right? Like you have form, you have line, you have shape, you have composition, these kinds of things that maybe might be thought of as more important. But of course, that's in a history that is mostly rooted in figurative painting. And then you have like the history of abstract painting that becomes what it becomes, especially pretty quickly in the past like 100 to 150 years. When I think about yellow as a means of implication, as a means of cultural preservation and travel across the sort of transatlantic journeys of our ancestors, that's what I hone in on there is like, for example, the painting in my show that's about curry, right? Or the painting in my show that's about turmeric. I think about yellow as even in a sense a gastrointestinal history, how we preserve that in our food, how we preserve that in our seasoning, how we preserve that in these are all really ways that we've chosen to preserve our light, the light that our ancestors were able to bring over. And I think with this show being about Trinidad and Tobago, it's particularly important too because, and I'm sure we'll get into this deeper, but the month that I was there 2 years ago was the month of November, which is generally when Diwali is celebrated. And yellow is the color of the marigold. It's the color of a lot of the sweets and a lot of the direct decorations that go up associated with that holiday, and that has everything to do with its relationship with light, and with sort of like this interpretation of Mother Lakshmi. And in a way, you can amalgamate that as a symbol of what we were able to bring over, particularly the Indian heritage side
Right.
of our Trinidadian ancestors, because they were able to voluntarily preserve their culture,
Right.
their religion, and that's now something that all of us in that country participate in sort of a what you always say is this hyper fragmented but syncretic way, right? That comes from the literature. So
Right.
that's my
Right.
long-winded answer to that question.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great. And since you insist on making me hungry, I'm here fantasizing about some doubles and some veggie
Hmm.
roti. I'm wearing yellow today. This was not planned. I guess my spirit really wanted yellow to be prominent today for some reason. I just
Hmm.
I just plucked this from my wardrobe, threw it in, and it's only this morning that the spirit told me, read a little piece from Meditation on Yellow.
Hmm.
So I'm glad the ancestors are sending us yellow as a resonant way of waking us up in this conversation and starting us off. David, I want to take a little step back just to let people have a sense of our relationship and where we met. So you came to Gettysburg College, and I am interested actually in hearing why did you choose your major of art studio, and what were some of your early influences, and then how do you find your way into my class? And what was your takeaways from that class?
hmm Again, try to make the shortest answer I can out of a long tail, right? But as Ivy read so eloquently in my bio, I have this history that sort of leads me on this path of scholarship, and it was very much so academically focused, right? I scored high in my standardized testing. That was opened up the door for me to be accepted into the scholarship program, Prep for Prep, and Prep for Prep is where the alumni of this program are able to earn scholarships to go to the high intensity independent schools across the country. So then I go to Dalton School from seventh grade through high school on the Upper East Side, and I had this interesting experience there where I'm actually surrounded by art that's taken seriously. And what I mean by that is that having gone to public school up through sixth grade, art was generally the kind of class that I taught my brain to relax in. And the more that time goes on, the more I realize that first phase of my journey is actually really, really key because I was treating it in like subconsciously as a point of healing even. And I know that's something that you and I talk about a lot is like the healing power of arts and of like the knowledge that it carries and that it brings throughout time. But yeah, so I have this phase of intense academic focus, and um, throughout high school, I was really falling in love with watercolor painting because of my teacher at Dalton, Miss Doe, who is still one of my biggest supporters. And when they put me in your hands at Gettysburg, I've no doubt it was because they saw that they have a Trinity Heritage incoming student, and here we have a Trinity born professor. And it was actually a blessing for me because it was the first time I ever was getting taught about, and this was when I took your Intro to Caribbean Studies class. First time I was ever getting taught about our people's history from one of our people. That is such a crucial crux moment for all of the work that I've been making since I've been a serious artist, and especially as it pertains to the show, because I'm dealing with the country that you were born in, that my father was born in. So really, it was this journey of finding a way to bridge my academic focuses with my artistic passion that sort of like a fused into the discipline that I think you especially helped galvanize because of the rigor that you introduce in your course, but also, because of the seriousness with which you treat the course subject matter, which is that was the best thing I could have ever been exposed to because that's the kind of seriousness that I take into my studio with me every time that I'm working with
Mhm.
our histories as the backdrop. And then from your class, I went on to end up declaring my studio art major, I believe the next year. And it was under Amir Kabashlia's tutelage that I became like this really intense abstract oil painter. And Amir is like my other like painting father, so to speak. And all the while, you're supporting me along the way. You're encouraging me, and you're keeping me grounded in I think the cultural backdrop that I've always needed. And then to wrap it all up in a bow, I rent out my studio at the start of 2018 after graduating 2017. I believe you visited my studio that summer, and you ended up becoming. This was totally, not expected. I didn't think you were coming to my studio with this in mind, and maybe you weren't. But there's a piece that you connected with so strongly that one of my early color meditations that you ended up collecting, and in that you became not only one of my longtime supporters, but one of literally the first person to buy a painting out of my studio, which still to this, I mean, it continues to mean more and more and more as time goes on. So I'd love for you to, if you'd like, speak about it from there, like the placement of the painting and how that maybe relates to like how you've seen the work grow.
Absolutely. And it's only recently I heard you tell someone and but that I was your first collector from your studio, and my heart just burst wide open. I was so happy that happened because when I came to your studio, yeah, I love art. My whole apartment is filled with art from around the world. I've been trying to pull back on buying things that I don't need, but art I feel like I need.
Hmm
And so this is why I'm so drawn to artists and I revere people who create art because you all hold up a mirror to society that we really need. And so I came to your studio and while I was there, I was like, I would like to invest a little bit, plant a little bit of seed into your nascent work, your nascent career. And I saw that piece, which was within my price range. I was like, okay, this works out. I love the colors and I can afford this. And I put it exactly in my office, right behind where students sit down. So when students come into my office and they sit down and they're facing me, your painting is right behind them so that when they get up and they exit, your painting is the thing that catches my eye every single time. And so it is a placement and a kind of a visual sanctuary for when students sit in that space that I'm creating for them. People come into my office and they're like, they look around, and I know that they're sensing something in there because the space is infused with my very spirit, and your artwork is a part of that. So we are indeed connected in this beautifully syncretic way, as you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm really glad that we have been able to stay in touch all of these years. Um, I would like you, Dave, before we get into talking about this current work, Trinidad and Tobago, to talk about your previous work that you just did, Jamaica, and maybe that could also be an entry point for you to speak a little bit more about your ethnic background and this search that you went on, this journey that you went on in Jamaica and then now Trinidad and Tobago.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's great because you've seen all these things too, so you can build up whatever spaces I may leave. But this work that's up currently at Ivy's projects is it's in a way the second phase of a 5 year goal plan that I had set out for myself now, 4 years and change ago, which was I was coming out of the exhibition that I had self-funded independently put on in 2021, I believe it was, called American Monarchy. And that exhibition was so focused on the here, the now, but also like the context in this country that it, it disillusioned me in a way that I realized has disillusioned many artists over the ages. This is the kind of stuff that like made James Baldwin like go to France. You know what I mean? And in a sense, I was like, um, I have the luxury, the privilege, the blessing of having a place to go. Like I can literally go back to where my parents were from. They both were born in those countries in the Caribbean, and my mom from Jamaica, my dad in Trinidad and Tobago, and came up here and met in Flatbush, where I still live to this day, right? So at the outset of that plan, I said, let me deal with Jamaica first because it's much more accessible to me. I've been going back there since I was 1.5. My mom sent me back with some family. The first time I went back there, I wasn't even with my parents. She just sent me. She was like, "Go, you have all these people that want to meet you." My mom is the oldest of 7, so there's like all these aunts and uncles who at the time were teenagers, who I still have awesome relationships with, right? And then there's my grandparents who, on both sides, I'm their first grandchild. So I was showered with a lot of love early from that culture, and I felt the same from my Trini side, but it's a uniquely different relationship because I was never able to go back there with my dad while he was alive, right? So, and that's a big crux point in the show as well, because we lost my dad to suicide in 2016. And that was a big reason for why I had to go back to fuel this work that's up in the gallery now with what it needed. So, in the first place, I went back to Jamaica for the month of, I believe it was a little bit of July and August of 2022, and I spent that month there with my grandma, and also my uncle came down there to spend time with me. One of my aunt's best friends was like my tour guide, became one of my best friends too. And I took, maybe probably like close to 15 rolls of film photography on that trip. And in the time that I came back from that trip, having started work on that exhibition already, I used those film photos to supplement the rest of the show and to constantly refer back to, as I said, to add the charge necessary to the paintings, because
Mhm.
ultimately painting is or any art making is a job of creating charged objects, that are going to carry that charge through time. So that trip was really essential for that because I hadn't been back to Jamaica since I was probably like 8 years old. So it was almost 20 years. And so it was a lot of like rehashing, but also a lot of familiarity. And then we had that exhibition, as Ivy mentioned, 447 Space, Sean Scully and Leanne Tomasco's exhibition space in Chelsea. That was really like it was effusive in a way because I have so much to say there because I've been going back there because my mom is still alive, still like an influence in my life. And so that body of work, I would say, had much more to do with reflecting the fullness of that side of my culture and that side of my heritage versus like going back to Trinidad 2 year yeah, no, a year later with my Trinidadian grandmother. Or no, that was 2 years. And this was like a trip that was super, super, super different because first time there, first time meeting family that I had never met before. And as I mentioned, I just so happened to be there during the month of Diwali, which is when they celebrate one of their most, intense spiritual traditions that I learned became like it's almost like pre-Christmas. Like, everyone kind of celebrates Diwali together in a sense, whether or not you're a devout Hindu, in the same kind of way that everyone celebrates Christmas in this country together, as they do down there. So learning about the placement of these sort of practices and how they persist through the history that we were able to galvanize within our cultural sort of selves, that is all of what fed into this. And that's how the second phase of that 5-year plan fleshed itself out to end up becoming this show. I did the same thing when I went back there, took those roles of film photography, came back, constantly referred back to them, and then also did the necessary kind of, you could say, internal excavation to be able to put what needed to be put onto these surfaces that is still as lush and, in a sense, effusive as the work before, but also way more, uh, uh, I would say, that acknowledges absence and emptiness and space in a way that it had to, because of the differences in my relationships with those cultures.
Thank you, David. That's really beautiful. As you are describing going to Trinidad for the first time, I am remembering when I went to Ghana for the first time in 2022. I had gotten a Fulbright and Spencer grant to do a project um, on Black youth in Jamaica, Ghana, Brazil, and Atlanta in the United States. I spent about 2 to 3 months in each of those places. So I've had my own diasporic journeying, and I'm going to be writing a book about that next year while I'm in New York on my sabbatical leave. But when I touched down in Ghana, I had been to other parts of Africa before, but I'd never been to West Africa, from where our ancestors came. And I've never done like the ancestry thing because I don't trust them with my blood. But anyway, so I'm not sure exactly where my lineage leads, but I was in the airport in Ghana waiting to come to the desk with the immigration officer, and tears welled up in my eyes because the realization dawned on me this was my first time stepping physically on West African soil.
Hmm.
The ancestors kind of woke me up in that moment. And so I would like you to tell me, when you went to Trinidad and Tobago, what were not only the intellectual things that came to you, but what were some of the affective things that came to you? What were some surprises that you had? Tell me about that journey in Trinidad, landing on that soil.
Yeah, there was definitely, I had my version of that too. I'm definitely I'm almost like you could say the inverse emotionally from yourself, in a sense, where I had that moment on the way out, on that drive to the airport, leaving at the end of that month. I'm looking out the window, I'm watching the land pass by out, and I'm realizing, like, wow, I spent a month here. Now this does feel like my land. This feels like my home, and this feels like a place that I want to come back to for the rest of my life. And that was when the tears started to flow. And the reason why was because the people who were even driving me to the airport were my cousin and her girlfriend Crystal, who is, who fuels the Dolphins for Crystal painting. That is, definitely become a fan favorite in this exhibition. And my first night in Trinidad, when I get there and meet these people, as I mentioned earlier, these are people who I've never met before. They've only really heard about me through my grandma, who, I'm like her first grandchild, and I'm in a sense, the remnants of her son, right? Who's still active in her life. So that's just a little bit of me explaining how she talks about me to people. So that's what they're expecting, and in a sense, I also I honor that enough to want to meet that expectation as much as I can. So when I get there and they're like, "Oh, you the grandchild, you the grandson that she talking about? Okay, yo, you the best one, you the ding, you the that, da, da, da. She can't stop talking about you." And I'm like, "All right, well, now I gotta like live up to what these people have heard about me." Like, and all of that it was beautiful because they only have heard good things. So it's like all I got to do is be in a sense myself, but in a sense reflect the goodness that they were showing me.
Yes.
And from that first night, Crystal is the person who we're sitting on the porch talking, and that we pretty much hit it off that night, became like best friends. um and she said to me, I'm gonna make sure this trip is special for you because your father never get to come back with you to Trinidad. So
Mm,
because he never get to come back with you, I gotta make sure you get every experience you need while you're here.
wow.
Whatever I can do
Wow.
to make sure that you have this be the thing that you can take back into the studio and put into the work, because that's what I was
Yes.
explaining to her. She's like, so why are you here? You're here for this, you're here for that, you're here to help your grandma deal with this house, you're here to like meet your family. I'm like, yeah, I'm here to do all of that, but really why I'm here is to make sure that while I do all of that, I'm encoding it into myself so that I could encode it
Yes.
into the work later. And
Yes.
that's why those tears flowed on that last, ride back to the airport, because it's her driving me, her and my cousin, who became like my
Hmm.
my tour guides, my best friends, my family that I always wanted, that I never knew that I had there waiting for me the whole time. And that's where, the pieces like the Nikita Dia, that's named for my cousin, that isn't up
Hmm.
in the gallery, but it's still part of the show itself. The
Hmm.
Dolphins for Crystal, that is the companion piece that everyone loves. That is the benchmark of, a lot of the personal relationships that I built there. And then even the Jimmy's Dharma and the Mala's Voice, which are two of the pieces in the upstairs section of the gallery that are named for and speaking to the energies that I received and reflected and respected in my uncle Jimmy, who is my grandma's cousin, who we stayed with while I was there, and his wife Mala, who, again,
Hmm.
family like I never knew I had. I remember one of the funny stories I love to tell is when I asked my grandmother how we were related to these people, and she told me that her mother said, she said, "Mommy say she and Jimmy's mother was sisters from another life." And I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean they're like second cousins or like third cousins? And she's like, "Mommy, tell me they're sisters from another life." So I'm like, okay, so this is like some sort of a Hindu spiritual, Indo Trini, like we're connected just because we're connected. And it's really like, it let me know even like I may not even really be directly blood related to these people, but some people say blood is thicker than water. Other people say the family you make is the family you make. It's not about the family you necessarily are subjected to. It's the family you choose, and they chose me, so I had no choice but to reflect that back. And that's a lot of what's going into the work. Some of the pieces that I named, and even a lot of the other ones that are dealing with a lot of the Hinduism that I was exposed to through them, but also with the understanding of um, these rituals and practices are a way for them to preserve what our ancestors brought over, the post African enslaved generation, the Indian indentured servants, who, as brutal as the conditions that they were living in were, they didn't come over enslaved, and because of that, they were able to voluntarily, you know, preserve their culture, and that's really what these rituals speak to. However much one Trini, whether Indo Trini or African Trini or anything in between, however much that person may or may not be, Hindu, it's still a matter of respecting how our country got to where it is, and all of the beautiful
Right.
influences that feed into it. Um,
Right.
so
Right. Yeah. I think, David, as you are speaking, the project I did, I think often about it as I was sort of tracing the transatlantic slave trade. I was encircling the ocean. I was listening for voices. I think of enslaved people who, on the slave ships, when they got a chance to jump off, some of them jumped into the ocean, you know, leaping
mhm,
to their deaths, and they preferred that than whatever other hell on earth that was coming. And I think of there being so many voices buried in the ocean that want to be heard, want to be disinterred, and they are speaking to us. And I do ardently believe that they're speaking through your work.
mm,
Um, and because we are a sea people, we are an oceanic people because of that journey and that trip. And you mentioned early before hyperfragmentation and sort of like super syncretism, terms that comes from a piece that I gave in that class, the repeating island, but from Antonio Benitez Rojo, that the Caribbean, because of colonialism, indentureship, and slavery, one of the few regions in the world to experience that triad. We are very, very fragmented, but we're also beautifully hybridized, and new syncretism such as Santeria and Voodoo Obia, all of those things are us, the carnivalesque. And when I
mhm.
think of your work, I think of it as the carnivalesque, as this kind of artistic sublimation of the violence is rendered upon our bodies. So let us go now, David, into some of the themes that you mention in your work. And some of it is around ritual and remembrance, diasporic memory, Hindu spiritual practices. Could you elaborate more on some of those themes, why you pursued them, and why you want to convey that to the world?
Of course, and even I'll speak broadly about that, but I'll start by speaking even more directly to the remarks that you just made, which is to say, I think about an experience I just had with a fellow Dalton alum, who was visiting New York. She lives in the Netherlands now, and she was adamant about seeing my show before she left. So she like it was the last stop she made before on her way to the airport, right? And I meet her there, and I'm talking to her about the piece in the show Tuner, that is the one actually that we took a nice photo in front of, and that I think definitely also has been really resonant with people, including yourself. And that's the piece that probably deals most directly with my relationship with my dad, and also the ideas around, yeah, here it is right here. The ideas
Mm,
around
love
like
it.
layering and reincarnation, and how power and energy is transferred throughout something as simple, or well, I shouldn't say simple, as complicated as like a tuner engine, the tuner engines that are in the cars in Trinidad, that really like speak to the legacy of my dad's car interest and how that carries down to me. And so why I bring this piece up, because my friend who was there looking at the piece with us, she goes, "It's crazy. I'm hearing you talk about your dad, and I feel like I'm seeing spirits in the work." That she literally said that, and it's funny because I believe this is literally the first time this friend has ever seen my work in person.
Hmm.
So it just goes to show, she's she's looked at images for over years, and she has been supportive through in that sense, but now she's like able to see it in person, and hear me speak about it in front of her. She's like, no, this is in a sense, that for me was a great point of praise, because she's letting me know that the work is doing what any artist would want it to do, which is it's going past the visual. It's
Yes.
now affecting you like internally, extra in an
Yes.
extra sensory sense.
Yes.
And that's starting with the visual. It doesn't mean that the visual is less important. It actually
Right.
makes it more important. But I
Right.
think also of, when I think back to your remark about color earlier, I think about like a painter like Peter Bradley, who is an amazing African American abstract painter, who it speaks about color being everything, color being at the forefront, color being it, like, in a sense, in a very contemporary art philosophical sense, color being form, color being shape, color being line, color being composition. How do you make work that reflects an idea about those things, about color being primary and those things having to follow it? So that's like one point of thinking that I think it it fuses with what I'm trying to do here, in terms of also like the reincarnative way that like light works, because light is inherently what's carrying all this color into, through, and to us, right? So when she speaks about like seeing spirits in the work, she's seeing is what Rothko was talking about. When Rothko says, like, his famous quote is like, if you're too focused on color, you miss the point of the work. Which he says, like, these paintings are about the grand human emotions, like tragedy, ecstasy, doom. So this is like the Rothko quote that everyone always hears in art school. But that is his way of elaborating that it, in a sense, the truth lies in between, right? The truth is that like
Mm-hmm.
it is everything, but it is
Mm,
everything because of everything else that is being
mm,
put into it.
mm-hmm.
That's how this kind of work is treating my family history, at the same time as it is being primarily and in a like paramount way concerned with what is happening on that surface, how the layering across the screens and the applications of paint that I've pushed through that evoke the kinds of subconscious sensations that I'm imbuing them with. Um,
Mm.
I had to bring that work up in I think in a specific sense, because that really spoke to what you said in terms of the histories of these voices of our ancestors that I think are still speaking through us. And they're speaking through you when you're in the classroom, the same way that they're speaking through me when I'm in the studio. It's just that it's
Mm-hmm.
being expressed and
Yes.
exercising itself differently, right? So and
Yes.
that expression and that exercise is all of how they continue to let themselves be known. It's all of how my dad continues to live on through me. You know what I'm saying? Which can't be helped, but also even the people who precede him, who I maybe don't have a direct link to, but who are also still in this work. When Keenan was her name, when she said that she saw spirits in this thing, I was like, wow, like, look at how somebody who maybe has never even looked at my work in person can just immediately see it for what it is. If
That's
that's
right.
not if that's not high praise, and if that's not a good eye, I don't know what is.
Right. Ashe.
Hmm.
Before I continue, because David, you and I can speak for hours and days on this. I want to check in with Ivy in terms of how much time we have for our conversation before we have to stop for taking other people's questions.
Sure. Maybe you can go for about another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll open
Okay.
it up for questions.
Yes. Awesome.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I know, David, what I don't get to ask you here, I'm going to get to ask you when we're hanging out.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because what I really love, David, about our relationship, I mean, I had an edited book come out last year called Disrupting Hierarchy in Education. I'm really interested in living as much as I can with my flawed sense of being in the world, living decoloniality. It has become Oh my, yes, yes. I remember you came to my book launch and you so hype. Yeah, what a blessing that was that you were there. Thank you, brother. Thank you. But with that book, David, as we have spoken, I'm imperfect at it because I'm a human being. There's no other way to do it, but imperfectly, I try to live what I teach. And if I am writing and teaching about disrupting hierarchy, then I have to live it. And so I love that our relationship is constantly being inverted, where I get to learn from you. I love when you start nerding out about art, and I get to be the student and you are the teacher in that moment. That is an embodiment of disrupting hierarchy. And your and my relationship, we get to live decoloniality across the oceans.
Hmm.
And so, David, there's a quote from your description online. It says, window screens as metaphor and tool, where paint, gesture, and spirit intersect. Um, could you talk more about that, please? Because I was so elated to see that you are bringing all of the human atomized cells together. I'm grateful for the age of enlightenment, but what it also did was that it disembodied our mind from our bodies, from our spirit, and you are bringing all of those things together into this beautiful vista. So tell us more about this quote and anything that you want to talk about regarding this body of work.
Yeah, sure. I love that because that's probably a great segue into maybe some of the questions about the actual process of how the work was made that we can get into afterwards. But I love what you posed there because it's like you make me think about uh oh, so much the window screen as the tool that I'm pushing the paint through as a way to, sort of analogize my relationship with my dad and his loss, and that was evidenced in the last painting as well. But at the same time, um, even sort of my own more interpersonal, like internal philosophies about self and spirit and how it all exists. I think there's something very maybe modern or hyper contemporary about like, this like kind of floozy sense of spirituality that is very detached, that almost focuses on the detachment more so than anything else. And there is like, ancient Buddhist sense of detachment, but then there's also this sort of like modern, almost like hedonistic, materialistic, like sense of detachment that maybe there is a truth to be found there for some people, but I think that the danger in, describing us as this sort of like tripartite mind, body, spirit that has its own, like science is pointing more towards this conclusion that because we can't reconcile the motivations of the mind, like where the electrical signals in the brain come from that power us, that we must be sort of these remote, almost like flesh batteries. Like where is the actual like origin point of this thing, the mind, the soul, the being, whatever. And the danger with like getting too caught up in that is then like, you don't care about your body. Then you don't care about how you're treating yourself while you're here. And this existence, before you get to the next one or before you can start to unlock the previous one, this is what we have. This is what we're blessed with. This is what we're lucky enough to walk the earth in and alongside the people who are like experiencing it with us.
Hmm.
And so I think that's part of when I think back to my education in south of France and the Marchute School, this is the kind of like qualities that we talk about infusing artwork with, something that is so hyper present that it also
Hmm.
almost forms its own reality that in a sense is related to and reflective of the reality that we're walking in always, but is detached and always gives us back what it gives us from its own place of sort of like a visual existence. It's almost like it forms a pocket in space time, a singularity,
Hmm.
and from that singularity what that art gives us is singular. You know, what the Mona Lisa gives us is singular. You know, what I could go on and on. You know, what these Rubens paintings, these Rembrandt paintings, these Pollock paintings, these Basquiat paintings, what they give us is singular because of how much they're attached to and speak to the times that they were made, and at the same time how they you know, gravitationally pull everything into and discard everything else away from what they really, really, really mean to impart to humanity. So when I'm like, that's like a lot of sort of like philosophy stuff, and that's not necessarily what an artist is thinking about, like me when I'm actually in the studio making. So it all has to come back to something like real and concrete, and that's where the notion of making, you know, a process that reflects all of that thinking has to spring forth. You know, Amir, when I was in school, he would always say, when I was at Gettysburg, he would always say, you know, eventually, David, you got to stop thinking and actually paint, right? And I'm like a chronic overthinker. Like I could read up and think about that stuff all day, but it's the painting that excites me. It's the painting that, like, you know, finding this window screen tool that then can now reflect like my relationships with this culture, you know. And the quote that I would wrap this all up in a bow with is from one of our dearly departed masters, Richard Serra, who I showed you some of his sculpture work, who just passed away recently. One of my favorite quotes of his in one of his artist talks, he was talking about, he said, and I'll paraphrase, he said, one of the best things that artists can do is devise their own tools for making. You know, come up with your own processes, come up with your own, and I'm expanding on it when I say these things now, like come up with your own reasons for making, and then match those with methods that speak to those reasons that also resonate with the visual language you're trying to set forth from within. So the screen, as it exists as a tool in this body of work, as rudimentary, as ready-made, as accessible, as everyday as it is there because it reflects in a very distilled manner and in a way that I've been able to use in an abstract sense how I'm preserving what I've been left with from my dad, and at the same time building on it.
Ashe.
Okay, so we're gonna open it up for questions, but I just wanted David to talk a little bit before we open it up to the audience. For David to talk a little bit about some of the other substrates, the copper, the plexi, the wood that you're using in the work, and how it is sort of like a almost like a radical act where you're not using canvas. You're sort of, you know, you're moving away from canvas and you're using these other materials. And so if you could talk a little bit about that and how those materials maybe speak to what it is that you're trying to convey in a way that maybe canvas, you know, is not, you know, able to convey what it is that you're trying to get across.
Yeah, and Ivy knows because she's heard me speak about this a lot, and especially as it pertains to the works, you know, that I've been making from college to now. And it's a journey that started with, I think, Amir handing me a sheet of plexiglass out of his studio when I was at Gettysburg as his studio assistant. I was running out of canvases, I was running out of, you know, wood panels, and he said, "Here, take a sheet of plexiglass." And I had kind of like this springboard moment where I was able to manipulate the paint on the plexiglass as oils in a way that was much more sort of reminiscent and akin to the comfort that I had built up from working with watercolors in high school. That was the start of this like materials surface exploration journey that persisted through college. And then when I started working out of my own studio, I consistently kept on getting wood panels and plexiglass sheets to paint on because the suppleness and the absorbency of canvas, I mean, it didn't necessarily agree with, I think, the material characteristics that I wanted these charged objects to be imbued with. You know, a certain roughness, a certain industrial quality, a certain contemporality, right? Like a nowness. And at the same time, when I came back around to painting on copper, which started in my Jamaica exhibition 2 years ago, that was in a sense a response to one of my mentors, Sean Scully, who some of his most beautiful paintings are on copper. And I wanted to pay respect to him by being like, here's my version of that, you know, but in my visual language, with my backdrop, with my history. And then copper is charged in and of itself, not only because of its actual charge, you know, copper is like a precious material for, like, you know, wiring and all these kinds of important utilitarian uses. And here I am painting on it. But it also has a history of, as a classical material, you know, Renaissance painters also have had some of their most beautiful paintings done on copper. So there is an art historical context for that I was matching with, you know, the now. And then the aluminum introduced itself in these more recent works in the Trinidad and Tobago show, where there are works on aluminum and even found metals that share the tone with, and this is what I wanted in using these metals, sharing a tone with the steel pan, which is, that is our country's musical injection into the world of sound. That is how Trinidad and Tobago lives sonically in that lexicon, in that language. So by painting on these surfaces like aluminum and found metals that reflect that tone, I'm also sort of giving all of the paintings that exist on those the backdrop of that sonic functionality, and at the same time playing with the texture and the way that the paint can move on those surfaces that is still akin to what started on plexiglass years ago.
Damn, that's beautiful. Oh, I can listen to this all day long.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I see we got some other questions here.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Hakeem, do you want to read the questions, or
Sure.
should I?
Yeah. Yeah. Or
Okay, maybe you can.
we can team up. I can read one, you can read one. How's that?
Okay, sure thing.
Nice. Yeah, collaboration.
Yes.
There's a beautiful question by Carla Forbes. Carla, thank you for this question. It states, thank you both so much for this rich conversation. As a first generation American born to Jamaican parents myself, I'm wondering, David, how you negotiated your American identity in your diasporic relations and how it affected what you claimed as your own culturally throughout your travels and artistic production. How, if at all, have you had to grapple with the consequences or effects of American assimilation, especially as someone who has moved through the educational spaces that you've moved through? What wonderful questions. Thank you, Carla.
It's an interesting question, especially as we have this conversation, because I noted before that in all of my sort of, especially my second phase of my schooling, sort of elite, expensive schooling that I was like scholarshiping through. It wasn't until I got to a freshman year of college that I finally had a professor who is from where my father is from, who could speak to me directly, literally, and also from a first person point of view about these histories and about how not only how precious they are, but also like teaching me some of the intricacies of them, how precious they really should be, and how they deserve to be treated. Now, at the same time, this is it has everything to do with like my personal upbringing as well, right? Like everyone has different relationships with the cultures that feed into who they are from a sort of ethno DNA perspective. Excuse me. In a sense, we all have everyone going on in us. I'm a big believer in these kind of Rasta mentalities, right? Like the unity that the human race needs to express is reflective in the fact that we are all more genetically similar than we are different. It's that, 0.0 whatever percent of differences that express themselves in everything from, facial structure variation to body type to even something like, melanation and skin color, which also has relationships with natural environments that we developed in, right? All of this to say, my actual upbringing has always been fed by the places my parents came from and were born in. So I never really had, it's interesting, like artists I think have and this is me speaking as a chronic overthinker. This is part of what art has given me in life, and this is part of the blessing of it. Like art gives me the thing to do, to not think about it as much. And what that reflects for me, to in a weird kind of way to answer that question, is a reality that I've always been lucky enough to exist in, which is I've never really questioned my relationship with my Jamaican side, my Trini side, my Americanness, the fact that I was born here. I mean, we all know, like, any Caribbeans that were born in the Caribbean, they'll remind you that you weren't born there. You know what I'm saying? And it's not like I'm trying to pretend that I was born there. At the same time, I have both of my passports to those countries, and I'm proud of the fact that I was diligent enough to secure my nationality in that way, because that's part of the legacy that my parents gave me. And there's value in that, there's practical value in that before I even get to what it means to me symbolically. At the same time as there's practical value in being American and being born here, that American passport holds the weight that it does for all of the reasons that we know that it does. So there's value in all of these things. And I'm the kind of person, because I'm maybe like a sunny side up type of guy, even though I like my eggs scrambled, I look at things in terms of like, what value does it give to me? Like, even though the situation might be scrambled, there is like an aspect of this that is always pertinent, is always like, can be treated as a resource, basically. And my parents' cultures have always been like full resources to me. and the experience that I've been able to earn in this country as the children of those immigrants has also been resourceful for me. So it's from that my work, I think, speaks to like the journey of the people that like fed into me for me to be here.
Okay, so thank you for that. Let's take one more question. So this one is from Benji Rothenberg. And Benji says, while we understand the work never stops, as Tom Sachs would say, the reward for good work is more work. So his question is, how have you grown since beginning this process, and what has been the reward?
Definitely, it's a funny quote because like I think that's the truth of like most artist studio practice, especially, you know, once you put in the discipline for it to become what it needs to become, for the work to reflect what it needs to reflect. That is the reward. Like what this has given me so far, not only is it priceless, but it also like I can continue to pave the road forward. You know, it gives me even more clarity on what work I should continue to make. And at the same time, it gives me entirely new wells that I can pull into to discover from for work that I haven't made yet, that I haven't even really conceived of. And that's a lot of what's happening in the studio right now. So, you know, it's tough because that's all work that's going to come when it comes, and I'm working through it right now. But it's while this whole show has been up, all of those visits to the studio have continued to be exciting, as much as they were exciting earlier this year when I was getting towards, you know, the opening of this exhibition. So to reflect Benji's question right back, in a very true sense, that is the reward. I think any artist would say that like the studio practice, the making is what we get lost in. The making is my, like, I love talking about my work, but there's nothing like actually doing it. You know, there is nothing. Me and Benji were actually at a talk a couple years ago for an artist and a writer curator named Robert Morgan, who just passed away in the past few years. Rest in peace to him. And it was one of the things that he and I have always talked about since that talk, is how Mr. Morgan said, you know, when I'm making the work, I'm focused on making it. When I'm not making it, I'm living. You know, I'm doing whatever else I'm doing. I'm not like, and that's the reality of how art and life run parallel. Like everything that I'm living is always feeding into the work. But when I'm not in the studio, I'm not gonna pretend like I'm in the studio painting. I'm living. And I believe, I'm a big believer that an artist has to live in order to imbue their work with the life that they want it to be imbued with. So the reward for that has not only been the work that has come and that will come, Benji, but also the road that has been set forth for me now for this side of my heritage. That now I've made these connections with these people down there. Now they all waiting for me to come back. Now I have more visits in my future and more that I'm going to be able to continue to infuse the work into. That's like how those rewards, again, art and life running parallel. I don't know if you want to take the last question. That one more came in.
Yeah, one more.
And this one says, if you want to read it, Hakim.
Your father played an influential role in your life. If he were alive today, do you believe you would be the artist you are now?
Definitely not. And that's a hard thing to reconcile. That's part of the brutality of losing someone to suicide, is that like, and this goes hand in hand with this again, sort of classical philosophical concept that art is sacrifice. Everything has to happen for the journey to be what it is. If I could change that, of course I would. But I also acknowledge that if I were to change it, my life would be irrevocably different in trillions of ways that cannot be quantified. You know, and so I know that for a fact, like, would I be, maybe I would be the same artist, but like 0.01% different, you know, but at the same time, it wouldn't, there's no way it could possibly be this path. And at the same time, you know, I miss him every day. I want him to be here. You know, I don't think I never really think that it's a fair trade. if that's a sort of a spiritually balanced kind of mentality that I try to take to look at it. But at the same time, the reason why it's not a fair trade is because what he left me with that I'm going to always be able to pull from is going to always be way more than I can ever put into the work. And that is also part of what I want the work to continue to carry, is the like assertion in the value of human life. You know, the fact that like no matter what, we should always still be here. We should always still decide to be here. Like as much as I love this existence that I lead as an artist, and as much as I'm proud of the work that I've built, what I said just now, it's never going to not be true. Like I would still trade it all tomorrow if it meant that I wouldn't be this artist and I wouldn't have this journey and I wouldn't, if he could still be here, because the value of human life will always, in my opinion, supersede anything, material. And at the same time, it is that's what art is the reflection of that value so that others can appreciate it. And maybe you're walking in a museum one day, a couple hundred years from now, and you take a moment with one of my paintings and you're reminded, without any sort of connection to me or my story and my existence and what's feeding into it, that this is a beautiful thing, and art and life is beautiful, and that's what we need to be reminded of to sometimes keep going.
David, you're speaking there, I think of an artist friend of mine who lost his grandmother on Sunday. She was the one who raised him. And he was like, I just wish she were around to see, where I would take my art. And I'm like, she is around. Energy is not destroyed. She's absolutely around. She is in you. And same with your father. Your father is speaking through you in your artwork. So I'm glad that you're channeling that.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. So that's another reason why I can't stop.
Right. Can't stop, won't stop.
Exactly.
Yes. So we have time for a few more questions. If anybody in the audience wants to ask, we have maybe about 10 more minutes or so.
Yeah, there's one in the chat.
For more questions. Okay. You want to take that one?
It says Ian Mill says, your work is incredible. How do concepts, colors, and textures guide your creative process, David?
Concepts, colors, and textures, it's a matter of buildup, I would say. So they will build up and break down. And so, as I mentioned a second ago, when I'm actually in the process of making, that is at the forefront. That is paramount. And when one is in that process as an artist, you're thinking about the rules that you've learned maybe in art school or even just in life. I mean, you don't really, I went to art school because that was what I earned and that was what was afforded to me on my path. I don't believe in, an artist needing that necessarily. Life is always the best teacher. You can look around and you can learn everything about light and space and color and how these things, influence how we see, in the same way that Cézanne did, and that's exactly what all of his work is about, is optics and sight and vision and how the world bends around, this orbed eye that we perceive it all through. The world is not in a frame like we think of a painting in. It's actually in this round sort of like, thing that's also always fluid and moving. And these are the kinds of concepts I'm taking into my work, but I'm not obviously trying to depict anything figurative. I'm creating abstract sort of they're worlds that are taking and considering the rules of classical works and of the world that we live in, like the things that I just described, light, color, form, but also, shape, line, perspective even. But at the same time, in work such as mine, and I think a lot of other artists that are working in a very contemporary manner would say, those rules are at times being bent, at times being broken, at times being entirely discarded, because the point is to introduce to you a world in these works that you have to now wrap your head around, And one of the concepts that I would talk a lot about in painting class at Gettysburg is what an artist has to do to make the work believable. And believability in art philosophy is a tough sort of thing to even start to talk about, and even harder to like imbue the work with. But the easy way to sum it up is what that means is when you walk up to like a Kerry James Marshall painting, or when you walk up to, for example, in my opinion, some of the work that's in this show right now, which are the best works really from this series, what they're supposed to do is you believe it, you don't question it. You don't go, like, what's going on here? You go, what's going on here? Like, I need to like investigate. I need to figure out how this world is establishing these rules and what these rules are and how it's bending what I took maybe for granted, that light should behave this way or that a color can only be treated that way. Of course, going back to the very beginning of this talk, yellow can be so much more than just yellow. Yellow can be cultural legacy and cultural lineage, and so how to treat it like that in a painting and think about it like that in a painting is one step towards, I would say, understanding how to answer that question, right? And I think the answers to those questions really lie in the work themselves. So like how they guide me is literally how they guide me to answering, I think, Ian's question. But how they get there is from me taking all of what I've taken in and then doing what I do in the studio to imbue, to reference those things, but that at the same time to establish my own visual language that one can, you know, conceive of, that has color at the forefront, but also is treating texture in a very unique way that only I treat texture and color. I mentioned color, but and then also Ian mentioned the creative process. Like that goes back to the question I mentioned, the quote that I mentioned before with from Richard Serra, where the creative process should be always indicative and in a sense reflective of where I'm bringing it from inspirationally. And at the same time, I'm also trying to make sure I have fun. This maybe is like a totally other side to the whole thing, but I also
Yes.
think back to being in class and again overthinking maybe a bit, and then my professor Amir being like, you got to make sure you're still having fun, David. I mean, if you're not having fun in the studio or making the work, then like it will show. You know, I think people in this chat who have seen a lot of paintings, you can kind of tell when you're standing in front of a painting that the painter didn't have fun doing. And if you can perceive that there's that level of fun, it doesn't even need to be like a beautiful, and when I say beautiful, I mean like subject matter wise, not necessarily like the content. The content of the painting can be like, you know, Goya like painting like, you know, Saturn like devouring, you know, his son. It's still a beautiful painting. And part of why it's beautiful is because he probably had a lot of fun painting it still, you know, even though it's grotesque on the surface. That should still come through. And if I don't put the fun in the work too, if I don't make sure that I'm having fun by doing fun stuff like pushing paint through the window screen or splashing it around or throwing it this way or waiting till it dries and then putting it into something else, or using like a giant scraper that they would use to move concrete to like move the paint in a whole on an entirely different way than it would with a brush. That's also me making sure that it's fun for myself, that it's activating me
Yes.
in a like a kinesthetic way.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have time for this next question by
Yeah, we
Brandy?
do.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Would you like to read it or you want me to read it?
I can go for it.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is from Brandy Locke. Brandy says, thank you so much for this. I'm interested in intellectual and artistic genealogies as the language of inspiration feels insufficient. Who do you consider your kinfolk?
Mm.
Everybody. I think one of the things that we have to do as contemporary artists is continue to democratize access to art and art history. It doesn't matter if it was someone who in a contemporary sense is as, you know, criticized as like Picasso in his personal life. His work is as much mine, especially because he was looking to the primitivists, you know, who are you know our people that really are like the an origin point that is anything but primitive. Um, that is as much my legacy as, you know, as Basquiat, as Frank Bowling, as Mark Bradford, as, you know, these contemporary African American, Black, you know, artists of color who I look to in a very sort of like a now inspiration sense. But when you ask me about my kinfolk, I of course have to mention people like Cezanne and Van Gogh, you know, who are there from an art historical sense as like these, and Monet as well, of course, right? These like fathers and like benchmarks of impressionism. These are the people who opened up the door for like abstraction to be like, it's not even just accepted, to be possible in the contemporary sense. Like if paintings didn't start to become about the impression of the artist's like vision of a space, then they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to become totally about the painting itself, in a sense inspired by life but divorced from it in all the ways that I was just describing with Ian's question in terms of the new rules that are being established in the spaces of these works. And so I consider my kinfolk all of art history, everything from yesterday to, you know, the cave painters in ancient times, who to me are still, that's still like what we're chasing. You know, when we talk about like art and life running parallel, nature is the greatest artist, right? Nature is who we're always being inspired by. Nature, when you walk into the Grand Canyon, when you see like a whale breaching, when you know, when you watch the lion or the cheetah hunt, you know, that sense of just awe at this just happening on the planet, kind of without anyone's influence, but really it's with the influence of all of the powers of nature that have conspired to make these things possible. That's what every artist is chasing in a sense. And then, you know, what I'm chasing in a more strictly painterly sense is that's what those ancient, you know, painters in the caves in Lascaux, or even sorry, in Southern Africa. There's a cave down there. I'm blanking on the name of it. I encourage everyone to look this up. South African like ancient cave where they found some of the oldest like human tools and things. Even those are the history of art. That's our lineage. That's us making stuff, you know, to express ourselves, to show who we are, to show that we were here, that we are still here, that we deserve to be like looking back and understanding from what we look back at how we could bring ourselves forward. And that's, you know, when I haven't seen them myself, it's one of the things I want to do before I die. But, you know, because these caves are so light sensitive, when you walk in there and you look up there and you imagine like ancient mankind, like digging into these places with, you know, in hazardous conditions, and, you know, just spitting in their hands with pigments and rubbing on the wall because they had to depict that bison that they just killed a month ago, that fed their whole clan, and that they probably worshipped, and that sustained them, and that was the life in the form of that thing that they were able to carry on. That's what drives those like prehistoric forms of expression. That's my kinfolk. You know, that's what I'm trying to do in the now. And I believe that that's what these works, you know, are showing, and that's what all of my work is speaking to, is my own version of that right here, right now, speaking to like my version of that bison. You know, it's much more complicated now than just the bison, but that's why the work doesn't necessarily look like that anymore, but still is carrying the same spirit.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Ivy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So we have about 5 more minutes if anybody else wants to put a question in the chat.
Well, y'all gotta have something. I'm here for you.
And while people are typing, I just want to comment, David, you know, I told you my two favorite pieces of which you mentioned during this talk, Dolphins for Crystal, and then Tuner. Dolphins for Crystal, it feels like such an invitation. I love being in the ocean, but I'm scared of like the deep ocean, to be honest. But I'm fascinated by the deep ocean. And this particular piece, oh my goodness, it brings up my fear of the deep ocean, but it also is so calming and pacifying that it's an invitation for me to sit in that deeply blue oceanic space. So thank you for it. And then Tuner, there was somebody at your art show and they were like, I'm loving the energy in here, but I don't know how to read the pieces. And I said, just let go. Let go. The piece will read from within you. And I took them to this piece here, Tuner, and I said, it looks like window screens. I said, he's creating a vista. Just stand in front of it and look through it. What do you see? And she just started there, allowing the pain to speak through her. And I love that you and I have a picture of ourselves in front of this. Ah, so gorgeous.
Yeah, it was crazy. Somebody was thinking about that screen thing, and they were like, it's interesting because the way that your experiences in Trinidad were in a way mirroring, in this almost hazy, ambiguous sense, your dad's existence, but also building on it. It's almost like the people there that were experiencing you were viewing you through this screen, you know, seeing me through the filter of his existence that still feeds into me, and at the same time trying to parse the newness of what I represent.
Oh, yeah, I really like that you bring that one up. I see someone else that also asked a question that I've been getting a bunch lately, which is what's my favorite painting in the collection?
Really, but I think this gives me an opportunity to speak about the piece Purple Line. The reason why I bring that one up is not because it's my like favorite piece in terms of what it represents, but purple is my favorite color, and it has been my favorite color since I was probably like 2 years old, since I could talk, not really without any sort of understanding of why. And when I speak about like I can speak about this piece as a way to like segue, or as a way to connect to that question, because even though it's not my favorite, what it does represent is like this ferventness of our liming, which is like something that we do in Trinidad. So I always tell the story of how we were driving along this brick wall in Trinidad, and we come across this big green sign with red letters on it that said no liming. And this is like a sign that in New York would have said like no loitering, you know, and underneath the sign it said, please do not lime here. So like in Trinidad, you know, liming, we go lime, we lime in, we're gonna lime tomorrow, we lime in at the party, we lime in after church, you know, it could be anything. You could be liming with somebody and partying, or you could be liming with somebody and just hanging out. So this painting is really, I think, speaking to the aspect of connectivity within our culture, right? The glue that keeps us together, that is about us being together physically. Like, you know, we live in this time inundated with so much of you know, here we are on a Zoom call, but what the point of this call is to build on the physical nature of how we connect, and that's what liming really is all about. So like, you know, this is even speaking to the history of the workers who used to be on the plantations in Trinidad like over 100 years ago, that they would get together under the lime trees for shade to cool off while they were, you know, at a long day's working. And that's the origin of the term in our particular brand of like Caribbean patois. So when I bring up this piece because I know
I'm
that
sorry
this
to
is something that's
interject, but the webinar might cut off, and I don't want it to cut off while you're speaking. So
No,
I just
perfect.
want to close things out by saying thank you to David, thank you to Dr. Hakim. This was beautiful, wonderful, you know, everything that I imagined it would be and more. And so just want to point out to everybody, and also thank you to the audience. Want to point out to everybody that Trinidad and Tobago is on view until Thursday, November 20th at 410 Jefferson Avenue in Brooklyn. So please stop by if you haven't already done so. And thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you in the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Yes.
Much love.
Yes.
Much love. Sweet,
Yes.
sweet TNT. Oh, how I love up my country. Yeah.